Just looking around the house for random supplies. You might be surprised at what you can do with, say, the edge of a marker, or maybe a larger marker. And this marker actually has a shape for its cap that's not a circle like this one is, right? So I have different things I can do here. A fork or other silverware around the house might make interesting marks. This is just a little bit of bubble wrap, okay? Here I've made something with texture just by using glue, a glue bottle to sort of draw lines. And then when that glue dried, now this has some texture to it, and I could use that for printmaking. Or I could paint directly on top of this and make something with texture. So I could do that directly in my book if I wanted to. And then also, other things that are specifically for printmaking or that specifically have texture to them will work really, really well. You can also create texture with hot glue once it's dried, okay, or words. And then you get to just sort of experiment with what you can do. Okay, so if I take my fork, for example, and I dip it in, I have some paint here. If I dip it in the paint, and then I just start making some marks with it, you can see what can happen. I would encourage you to experiment. Now notice how I'm experimenting on paper that is not my final draft. I'm not working in my final book just yet. I'm trying it out on a separate sheet of paper. Just wiping that clean, and then I could even layer with a different color on top of this to see how that looks. There are so many options for things you can create with even the simplest of tools. You might be surprised. So here's the edge of the marker. These are things that I can easily clean later. Just by dipping in a little bit of water. Right, so that's one side of the marker. The other side is more of a circle. And then I can create different and smaller circles with a smaller pen. Now I gave you a marker just like this, a felt tip marker. Maybe yours is blue, maybe yours is black. Maybe you have both. Ooh, and that actually has an X in the middle of it. Didn't show up on the first one I made. It showed up as the paint became thinner and thinner. If I use the opposite end. Right. Use the bubble wrap. I could just dip it directly in the paint and sort of rub it through the paint and see what happens. Maybe that'll work well, maybe it won't. Seems like it coated all right. There we go. Now again, with bubble wrap, I could just run this under some running water and it would clean it very, very easily for me, and then I can reuse it with different colors or just use the same piece again over multiple different projects, right? You don't always have to throw everything away after you've used it. I layer a little bit of silver in there. Let's just see how that looks. Ooh, I love it. Okay, so you can get creative with all of these things. Now, like I said, if you have stencils already in existence, that might be worth a try. You might need a paintbrush to apply the paint, but give it a go and see what happens. Just using a little bit. If I use too much paint, it might sort of ooze underneath the lines of where I want it to be. Okay, and I accidentally went over the edge a little bit there, but this is why we practice, right? So we can sort of check it out and see how it works and then make adjustments. Or be more careful next time. Oops, see, this time I wasn't careful on the other side, but here we go. So one of the things you can do is make your own stencil. So you can draw out some words or some shapes and then cut them out of, I'm just using cardboard, but you could do this out of paper too. Now paper won't hold up long over time because paper will just sort of disintegrate after you've painted over it a couple of times, but cardboard does decent if you want to make your own stencil. Like I said, you could write words or do shapes. So I'm just going to take a moment to first draw it out in pencil. Okay, and then when it comes time to cut out your stencil, you can use a box cutter, and this is something you might have around the house or in the garage. Just be careful, this is a razor blade. It will cut you, and if you're not careful, that would be a real bummer. I don't want anybody going to the hospital or to the doctor over art projects. This is also something that we would be using if you were here in classes. It's called an X-Acto knife, so it's the same type of blade, it's just, this is more for creative projects. This one is more of a utility sort of thing, but it will do the job either way. So as I'm cutting, I'm never going to be pulling toward my hand. That's a big no-no. That way if I slip, I don't catch my hand. I can use my hand to help support what I'm cutting, but I'll always be pulling my blade toward myself, but never toward my hand, right? So as I cut, I can turn the thing I need to be cutting, but I don't ever want to have my hand in the way. So if I feel like I need to put my hand in the way, what I need to do is actually move this thing around and see how else I can arrange my hand so that it's in a safe place and I'm not pulling the knife toward my hand. Now before I start cutting, I also want to make sure that I protect my surface. I don't want to be cutting on my table. So I have here at school cutting mats, and maybe you have something like this at home, especially if you have anybody crafty in your house. X-Acto knives aren't out of the question either. But if you don't have anything like that, just go get an old box, some cardboard to protect your space. That will work really, really well. So here we go. I'm going to start cutting. I'm going to cut out my star first. You might have to go through the cut 1 or 2 times in order to actually cut all the way through your cardboard. So I will say that rounded lines or curved shapes are a little bit trickier to do with these things. It can be done, but it's a little more complicated. The knives don't always move as smoothly in curves. Straight lines are pretty easy to work with though. Okay. And again, this is just an option for how to create a stencil so that you could paint and make the same shape again and again and again without having to be so precise or without having to worry about how you're going to make it symmetrical every time. Right, so now I have a star that I could use when I'm painting. I also could do these words or these letters, right? That would be, again, something that I can use to make multiples of the same thing. And this is considered a form of printmaking. Now, if you have other stencils that maybe you might have around the house, right? These are great to use too, but you can always create your own. And then here's my stencil that I made. There's my star, and you can see where when I was cutting out my stencil, I kind of messed up and I lost the hole on the inside of my A. I did a better job hanging on to it with the R. And then here when I was trying to do the circle on the bottom of my exclamation point, I struggled. It's hard to make a round cut, so I just made it a tiny little triangle, which might actually end up looking more like a circle in the end. But let's see if this time, what if I try some green paint? I just do little dabs. We'll see how this turns out. We will just see. Okay, here we go. Moment of truth. Pretty good. I'm actually proud of that. And look, this one actually kind of looks almost like a little circle in the end. So now I could repaint this multiple times and in different colors even if I wanted to. I probably want to wait for this to dry before I get too close to it, but there we go. So I could even, once this green dries, go over it with a different color, sort of on top of the same one that I've already made. That could give a really interesting effect. So printmaking allows you so many different options. So many different options. And I think it's worth trying for different and more creative and unique ways to make marks inside your own book.